Welcome to A Tale of Two Scribes. I'm your host, Eric P. Bishop. This is a podcast where interesting people come and tell about the stories they've crafted. As for myself, I'm an author. I've created novels, short stories, novellas, and even poetry. If you'd like to find out more about what I've done, please go to my website, ericpbishop.com. Thanks, and enjoy the journey. Welcome to another episode of A Tale of Two Scribes. Tonight, I am pleased to have Fred Burton on the program. Fred, welcome.
Eric, thanks so much for having me on. You're very kind to do so.
Well, thank you. You've done so for me as well. When my debut book came out, you had me on your podcast and gave me some great exposure. And it's folks like yourself who have kind of lived the life and then told what they've experienced are kind of besides the people I look up to, you're kind of what inspire me, especially since I'm writing just fiction, but I try to, blend reality in there. And I don't need to look very far for reality because of the experiences folks like yourself have been through in this life.
Oh, you're very kind. For me, it was a long time ago, but some days it seems like yesterday.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. My kids now are getting to that age where I can have a lot of more adult conversations with them. My son will be 18 here soon, which kind of crazy. He'll be old enough for selective service less
Mm.
than 6 months, which is kind of wild. My daughter just turned 13, but I kind of find myself now having those conversations that we heard when we were younger from people saying stuff. Well, in my time, this is what happened. And like we did with our older folks in our life, we were probably a little bit rolling our eyes, and my kids are probably doing it to me, like, "Oh, yeah, Dad, the '80s were a long time ago." It's like doesn't seem like it was that long ago.
Yeah, the hourglass of time has certainly turned against me as well. You look around, Eric, and I'm sure you see that with your kids and just life in general. And where did those years, and in my case, where did those decades go?
hmm Well, and hopefully as we get older, we're able to look back and we're able to appreciate it. And then going forward, we see that I know we had talked off camera about Jack Carr. I know Jack mentions it in his podcast that the most precious commodity we have in our life and the thing we never will get back is our time. So, it's a lesson for everyone to go out and enjoy your life, but also be cognizant of the fact that time is a diminishing resource we have. And what do you want to spend your resource doing?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And Jack has been so kind, not only towards me and just helping others in this business. He's certainly riding a rocket ship that's simply amazing with success, and he deserves all the credit he can get.
I agree. I absolutely. I know in just my experience in the writing world, his name gets thrown out a lot, and I try to remind people, and in the nicest way, of don't expect that you have to have the same path as Jack Carr, because you probably will be disappointed. But the flip side of that coin, and I have some challenge coins. I actually have a shelf down here off camera, all his books, challenge coins that he's kind enough to send me every year. The flip side of that is there's always the possibility that you can be the next iteration of what Jack Carr has become. Don't rule out the fact that success can come. And I think so often, um, two things happen. One, we look at the person that's reached a pinnacle of success and kind of you have that envy and that, oh, how did they get there? And I want to get there. Your mindset might not be right. But you should think about the fact of you can achieve success, even if it's not the same success a, B, and C person have, you can achieve your own success. But, it just depends on how hard you're willing to work for it.
Yeah, I think that's very good advice. I mean, I think guys like Jack Carr and Brad Thor and Mark Graney and these guys are the exception, not the norm.
Right.
I'm not. There's a heck of a lot of others like us that are muddling along and trying to do the best we can and try to turn out the books that folks want to read and build a brand and so forth.
Right.
And you know, something to be said for perseverance and just hard
hmm
work and keeping at it. And you never know when that book is going to catch the eye of the right person. I was reading a fascinating story in the Wall Street Journal. I think it was like a week before, where the writer for Slow Horses, the wonderful TV show,
Okay.
Took forever to get kind of started. And he
Hmm.
has such a great story behind just not giving up. And all of a sudden, an editor takes a chance on him and
Hmm.
reads his first book, and just he catches fire. And it's like lightning in a bottle. And, the next thing you know, he's a tremendous success and has got a hit series that is pretty darn good, to be blunt.
Right. Well, you can't know if you're going to be that 1%, that person that makes it, but you can guarantee you won't if you don't put in the effort. And if you're a writer, complete the manuscript. If you're a songwriter, write the song. If you're an artist, draw the picture, paint the painting, whatever it might be. Every now and then someone goes to a gas station and buys this little piece of paper, and all of a sudden, they buy a couple houses in Beverly Hills. But most of the people that end up doing that lose those houses within 4 to 6 years. So I think the person that actually creates something that really busts their tail, I think they have a different appreciation for when that success comes. And I think they also have the capability to be able to handle that success when it comes.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. And for the record, I've never been one of those folks that have ever won anything such as a lottery.
If you did, you'd have a Fiji behind you. You'd have a nice tropical island and some nice waves lapping up next to your feet. So neither am I, and I don't think I want it. Every now and then I'll get a wild hair, and a friend will be like, "Hey, Powerball is almost 1 billion," and I'll run to the. I always go. So I'm in North Carolina, but I'm really close to the South Carolina line. So I always go buy my ticket in South Carolina because if it's still true, it was years ago. This is how rare I buy them. South Carolina and I don't know if it's Kansas. No, it's one of the Illinois, Indiana. There's another state in the Midwest that you can claim it as anonymous. Your name does technically not have to go out versus if you go win it in California or New York, they're going to put you in front of that camera. You're going to hold that big check, and all of a sudden, Fred Burton's going to be like, Eric, my man, I only need 1 million.
Right,
everyone that knows
right.
you is gonna really know you. Um, I'd rather just disappear. I'd rather get that big paycheck and just, what do you know? I have a place in New Zealand now that I've happened to be writing my books in. So
I think I would vanish in the Federal Witness Protection Program and get a new identity, and good luck trying to find me.
probably smart. So before we get into your books, I do want to touch on you because I think it's interesting that we've been talking about lining this up for a little while. I think I reached out to you back in the spring when I was first starting the podcast, but I wanted to get established and I wanted to get comfortable in my own skin before I brought you on because you're a subject matter expert in so many things. And, I wanted to be able to hold my own in a conversation about serious topics. And here we go. We got some serious topics happening. Let's see. We've had a second almost assassination attempt on a former president and a current Republican nominee. Rumors of that we're going to start authorizing giving missiles to Ukraine that can be launched into Russia, and we're on it's like one bad thing happening would be something, but it seems like we have like 3 or 4 layers going right now of like literally cataclysmic events going on. What's going on, Fred? What is going on in the world right now?
Well, the world is a dangerous place. It always has been. I'm giving a keynote tomorrow at a regional intelligence conference, and one of the topics I'm going to talk about is, our new days of rage that currently we are in. Certainly,
Hmm.
the curious part is a student of history and a student of protection, primarily. If you look at the time frame between 1968 and 1972, believe it or not, we were living in a much more violent society. I
Right.
think the FBI cataloged, it was something like over 2,500 domestic bombings during that window of time between
Hmm.
68 and 72, to include the bombing of high value targets like the US Capitol, the State Department outside my old office that actually took down 3 floors, the Pentagon, an NYPD substation, college campuses.
Hmm.
And this is an interesting fact. There was 130 domestic hijackings during that time period as well. And then, of course, you had the catastrophic assassinations of Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King in
Hmm.
68. Now, the interesting aspect, if you look at that first Days of Rage and kind of compare and contrast to where we're trending today, obviously with the second presidential assassination attempt on Donald Trump, it's interesting to me, just having spent a lifetime in protection, that you have to go back to 1975, and that's when Sarah Jane Moore and Squeaky Fromm, in a 3-week period of time, tried to assassinate President Ford. Interestingly, in California. So
Hmm.
the Secret Service has really not seen anything like this. From a threat matrix perspective, obviously that Singleton, that lone threat actor, has historically been the problem. You know, you
Hmm.
can rattle off Jackson, Lincoln, McKinley, Reagan, the list, Kennedy, obviously, the list just goes on and on. So
Right.
that's always been the problematic issue for protectors in general, especially for the U.S. Secret Service.
Hmm.
Then obviously we have the two hot wars that's going on, the Israelis and Gaza, and then of course the very volatile Ukrainian Russia problems. And that to me is one that I think is too early to see how it plays out. Obviously, our support for Ukraine and NATO and so forth is one that's persistent.
Hmm.
And so is our support for the state of Israel,
Right.
regardless of whoever takes the White House in January. That will be unwavering,
Hmm.
and always historically will be. So, the world is a dangerous place, but again, it always has been.
Yeah.
Having said that, from a just an expectation perspective or just from a forecast perspective, literally we were living in a much more violent and dangerous time period in that 68 to 72 time frame, at
Hmm.
least domestically. So I think perspective is important.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, got your book right here that you were actually kind enough to send me
Thank you. Thank
several
you.
years ago, and it's I've been looking back on it because I knew we were going to talk, and then ironically, tomorrow night I'm doing an interview with this gentleman,
Oh,
so
wow.
I'm kind of getting a double dose of that historical thing, and absolutely to your point, I think we're very short-sighted that we see the world and where we are right now, and we think, man, this is the worst time to be alive, or this is the most dangerous time to be alive, and I think a lot of that has to do with these little things that we have here because we were bombarded. CNN in a way did an amazing thing in Ted Turner, but in some ways it really damaged I think us as humanity because we're used to now 15-second sound bites and our attention spans have continued to just get smaller and smaller and smaller. And it's almost like it's like social media. You need that dopamine hit, those likes, those retweets. You need that. And it's just like, no, we just need to chill out a little bit more. And yeah, back then there were so many life altering things happening that we've kind of lost perspective of that. And probably also because I think because of the way technology's changed and people's attention spans and the media influence in our lives is we don't look back as much as we need to look back and go, okay, wow, there really was, like you were saying with Ford, I think it was 17 days apart for President
Right.
Ford with the two assassination attempts, which were both before I was born. And then Reagan's was what, 80, 81?
Night 81.
81.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So I was like 5 years old. So I didn't hear about that until, I mean, I might have known about it when I was a little kid. I just have no memories of it. But as I got older and started studying history myself, I remember watching about it and seeing, hearing about James Brady and all the things that occurred with it. And then for, basically for 40 years, we've had no, at least attack that we're aware of where someone's been successful that they've got a shot off and hit the president or a candidate or whatever. So in that way, I think our collective memory is short, and we go, man, this is life altering thing. It's like, no, like you said, this has happened before. We keep repeating history, and we're destined to do so until we learn from it. I think.
Well, I think it was Shakespeare that said, the past is prologue. And if you look at Jack's book that's coming out on the Marine Corps barracks bombing, I mean, you go back to my time period in that era in
Hmm.
the early and middle 80s, and we had the U.S. Embassy bombing in Beirut the first time. Then you had the Marine Corps barracks bombing, which
Right.
Jack's book is no doubt going to cover in great detail. And then we had, obviously, the kidnapping of Bill Buckley, the CIA
Hmm.
station chief, which was a brilliant move on the part of Iran and Hezbollah to kidnap the CIA station chief.
Right.
And then while he's in captivity, we have the U.S. Embassy in Beirut bombed again in
Hmm.
'84. And then we had the U.S. Embassy in Kuwait bombed. And then we had, the hijacking of TWA Flight 847 and the killing of Robert Stedham, the U.S. Navy diver, and his body tossed out on the tarmac. And then we had all these hostages in Lebanon that we could not find,
Hmm.
from Bill Buckley, the CIA station chief, the officials that worked at American University of Beirut, the Americans. We had French, German, South Korean, Russian, Irish. The list just goes on.
Right.
And, Hezbollah in Iran was winning. We were losing badly, and we could never get in front of the threat.
Hmm.
And I will say this, we suffered mightily from, the lack of human intelligence during that time period,
Hmm.
predominantly in Beirut, having had the CIA stations in Beirut catastrophically destroyed in the '83 embassy bombing, which kind of took out our eyes and ears of what was happening on the ground there. So, that time period was just a blur for me. And, we're as you look at world events today, I think it's important for all of us as Americans to understand how we got here
Hmm.
because we have the same threat actors that are still involved. Iran is still out there as a strategic, threat to the United States. You have Hezbollah, rocketing Israel every day and Israel doing tit for tat. And
Yep.
Lord knows how that's going to, resolve itself, if it will resolve itself.
Right.
So it's important to understand world events because it very much resonates domestically on U.S. soil.
Hmm.
What happens abroad resonates here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what it was just in the news recently is the Houthis, I think, sent some weapons, sent some
Missiles,
missiles
yeah.
over to Israel as well. So yeah. So I know you wrote in great detail with Beirut Rules. Where were you during that time period? Where were you in your career at that point?
I was a special agent assigned to the counterterrorism division
Okay.
at the State Department at the time period.
Okay.
But I was reassigned to go work at the CIA Counterterrorism Center, which had just started in the '80s.
Hmm.
And specifically inside the Counterterrorism Center, Eric, we had a group called the Hostage Location Task Force, or the
Okay.
HLTF. And it was a small group of CIA, State Department, FBI,
Mm.
and then we had isolated support at times from DoD, different elements within DoD if we needed something
Mhm.
from them. But our job was to find the hostages, predominantly the CIA station chief, Bill Buckley, who had been
Mhm.
kidnapped. And we kind of figured if we could find Bill, we could also find the other hostages.
Yep.
And I tell you how blind we were in that time period. It's really hard for people to understand today, and people just kind of shake their head, and I don't think it computes. But until the first one or two hostages came out of that time period, which one of them was Father Martin Jenko, a Catholic priest.
Mhm.
Another was David Jacobson, the hospital administrator at the American University of Beirut. We literally had no idea that all the hostages were being held together. We
Okay.
thought that they were scattered around Lebanon, predominantly in the southern suburbs of Beirut.
Mhm.
And it would have been a daunting task to even find them
Right.
because you couldn't send people in to locate them. And there was great worry after all these catastrophic terrorist attacks in Lebanon that if we sent more operators, Delta, SEAL Team 6, CIA operatives on the ground there, that they would get kidnapped too.
Mhm.
And so we were really kind of pushing a boulder up the hill, but we were blind and we lacked the human intelligence to find the hostages and specifically Bill. And I look back on that time period, Eric, and I think it was probably one of my biggest failures
Mm.
granted we had tremendous failure in the counterterrorism arena during the '80s with the catastrophic embassy bombings. But at least for me personally, I think we could have done more um,
Mm.
during that window of time to try to
Yeah.
find Bill. But we were really hampered with just a lack of technology, a lack of satellite, a lack of ELINT, MENT, HUMINT
Right.
to be able. So we were doing the best we could, but we were fighting an asymmetric enemy that owned the geography,
Hmm.
and literally they were winning.
Do you feel like just, I guess now you can look back at it from a technology standpoint and think of all the things you could have now in these times for something like that to happen. But back then, did you feel like your hands were tied because of bureaucracy or just because of not having the eyes on on where he was or where they were holding the hostages or
I think it was a combination of a lack of technology developments. I mean, it's hard for folks to understand. I mean, we had no internet.
yeah.
We barely had computers. Obviously, we had organizations like NSA helping us as best they could.
Hmm.
Uh, and then we also had, the CIA, which I think everybody kind of thinks is omnipresent during that time period and was
Right.
everywhere. But in reality, we weren't. We were a small group,
Hmm.
assigned to try to, resolve this problem, doing the best we could. But we lacked that human intelligence, meaning for those that are watching this, you know exactly what I mean. If you've ever been in the government or worked informants or sources, if you don't have a window into how these groups are operating and where they're holding people and how they're moving people, it's the same dilemma that the Israelis and the IDF
Hmm.
and the Shin Bet are facing today in Gaza, meaning, they've got pretty good understanding of that geography by now, but they still can't find Sinwar, the head of Hamas,
Right.
and they still can't find all the hostages. So it's kind of like the same problem that we had, but we had no resources on the
Hmm.
ground to be able to help us to get like eyes on a building.
Yeah.
So on a practical level, Eric, this shows you, how we would typically work a problem. We would debrief a hostage, we would get the hostage out. Usually they were released. We would fly them from Beirut to Wiesbaden, Germany, to the old Luftwaffe base there that was a U.S. Air Force hospital,
Okay.
U.S. Air Force hospital. We would have three of us would debrief that hostage. We would try to get the hostage to walk us through their last location they were held, and then go back in time and begin at the beginning.
Hmm.
And literally, a lot of times they had masks over their head. They were
Right.
tortured. They were beaten. They were transported at night. Some had a better understanding. It's like any other hostage. Some had a
Hmm.
better understanding of how the door worked, which way the windows swung open. We would have them walk through different locations.
Hmm.
Could you hear children playing in the street? Could you hear airplanes?
Yeah.
Could you hear the call for prayer? How close was the mosque and so forth? So, and we would kind of catalog that.
Wow.
Meanwhile, we would be dissecting photographs and video that Hezbollah, or at the time Islamic Jihad, released to try
Hmm.
to see if there was any commonalities. But we would struggle with the basics, Eric. Like I remember great debate, arguments, flat out cat fights at the CIA between, what was the degree of Iranian control on the hostages? Meaning,
Hmm.
we had this group called Islamic Jihad. We would study their communiques. We would do psycholinguistic analysis on their communiques. We would dissect every word. And then we would say, is this Iran? Is this Hezbollah?
Hmm.
Who are these guys?
Hmm.
And so we were struggling with just basics.
Right.
But after a period of time, we got better
Right.
at making sense of the puzzle and pretty much figured out that Iran was pulling the strings.
Hmm. How difficult was it then years later to take those experiences and you know the conversations you had with people that were the hostages? How difficult was it to then tell a non-fit tell a true story of the events that happened? Was it difficult to put that into a written form for you?
It was. I
Was it
had been
cathartic
writing.
as well?
Well, yes, some of the books were better than others, meaning let me digress to my last nonfiction book there, Beirut Rules.
Hmm.
I always wanted to tell Bill's story because Bill was a hero who died for his country. And,
Hmm.
you know, I still had a lot of guilt. And it was cathartic to write that story. I was able to reach out to Bill's family, which most of which have passed away now,
Okay.
solicit their help. I went to the CIA right up front and I said, hey, I worked on this case years ago. I want to tell this story.
Hmm.
Will you help me? And they got all in. They said,
Okay.
absolutely, we'll help. And so they declassified a lot of Bill's records,
Hmm.
turned over photographs, introduced me to people that I would have eventually found, but they were able to hunt them down for a bit. And
Gotcha.
then I went to Bill's family. Bill had a lifelong girlfriend, was never married,
Okay.
but she was very protective at first. And then I went to Bill's
Hmm.
sister, and she was very protective too. They were both up in the Massachusetts area.
Okay.
And then they were able to tell me about Bill, the family man, Bill the
Hmm.
child, Bill growing up. And so, and I'll be honest with you, when I was an agent working Bill's case when he was a hostage, I really never knew that much about Bill. I knew he had been a Green Beret, but I never knew he was awarded the Silver Star in
Hmm.
Vietnam for heroism. I never knew that Bill had volunteered to go to Korea at age 18 to fight in the Korean War.
Yeah.
And so I was able to learn a lot about Bill the man. And that was great to be able to do and to tell his
Hmm.
story. And so, but looking back and from a narrative perspective, my stories, I like to look at cold cases or cases that people have forgotten about that I
Hmm.
think people should know and
Yeah.
people should remember. And, you know, all of my books are stories on, for
Hmm.
the most part, um, stories that need to be told in my judgment,
Yeah.
shining a light into heroes that people have either long forgotten
Hmm.
or people should know more about. It's kind of like when you walk into that front door at the CIA that you see in Jack Ryan and Tom Clancy, and you look at all the wall of honor there with
Look
all
at the
the gold
stars.
stars on the
Yeah.
wall. I mean, every one of those is a very powerful story.
Right.
And I wanted to tell at least Bill's story,
Hmm.
and I was hoping that it would inspire others to either want to serve,
Hmm.
get in the business, and so forth. And I was tremendously honored by former President Bush 41, who wrote the testimonial for the jacket cover for the story.
Hmm.
And he did that when he was a very sick man, right before he passed away. So
Yeah.
that was a true honor that he wanted to be able to do that. But
Did you
former
meet him?
CIA, oh yes, I knew I
Okay.
had worked, protected him back when you got to remember, he was the DCI, Director of Central Intelligence. He
Right.
was the U.S. ambassador to China, vice president during Reagan's first term, and so
Hmm.
forth. So, but I'll tell you, just how our industry is. I mean, we help each other.
Hmm.
We help each other with testimonials. We help each other as best we can get published.
Absolutely.
We try to open doors for each other. And I just reached out to his office and his chief of staff, and I said, hey, I know the president probably doesn't remember me at all,
Hmm.
but I want to show him a book about a CIA officer that died a very miserable death, but it's a good story about a hero who died for his country. And lo and behold, I get an email back literally that same week saying, the president would love to write a blurb for your book. And I was like,
Wow.
wow.
Yeah.
But, you know, that was the kind of man he was.
Right. I have so I was telling you, you turn the camera around and what you see here isn't always what is in the rest of the room. It's very well it's a nice laid out room, but it's a living room. It's other stuff. Well, can't see it from here, but near my door, I have a letter from President Bush. So
That's
I got
awesome.
it in 2000. Sent me a personal letter. I had written him. He had come out with his book Heartbeat,
Oh,
and
wow.
it
Yeah.
really touched me. It was really one of those stories that I felt like, so often people tell the story, they write their own autobiography. They're kind of telling their story from their perspective. Well, it's a little different when you tell the story of your life based on the letters you wrote to people during all
Mm.
these different times in their life. So, again, it was just a moving book to me. So, it didn't take me very long. I just jotted a letter of thanks to him, sent it off. And I did put in there, if I ever hear back from you, I'd love to have a signed photograph for my wall. You've been an important figure in my life. And didn't think about it, figured I'd never hear back from him. And months later, I get this thing in the mail, and it was something with cardboard in it, so it wouldn't be bent. And I'm like, what the heck is this? Open it up, and there it is, a letter from him, signed photo. I then had the joy of getting the same thing happen with his son. I actually wrote when I wrote The Body Man, I sent hardcover copies out to all the former presidents and also at the time President Biden. And I also included a challenge coin, and the challenge coins were numbered. I did 50 numbered challenge coins, and I sent the ex-presidents their numbered coin. So
Oh, wow.
I sent
Wow.
President Bush 43 and I sent him 41, and I said, your dad was kind enough to send me a letter several years ago. I treasure it. It's framed, it's on my wall. So I want you to have your dad's coin as well. So I sent him both coins. Again, not knowing if I ever hear back. Well, I did. I did get a letter from President Bush, thanked me for the coins, thanked me for the kind words about his dad. Um, Ironically enough, there was a second letter in the package that said, President was happy to do this for you. You may not post this letter on social media. It's like they must have looked at my account and saw that I post stuff. So, but again, another one of those things where it's framed, where it's just like, and I've tried to, and my kids aren't very impressed by it, but I'm like, there's not been very many American citizens that have served as president. So to be able to get correspondence from any of them, whether you're a Republican, Democrat, I don't care who you vote for, but to get that connection with someone that held that highest office you can achieve in the country from a history major, and I was a history minor, but from a history perspective, it's a pretty significant thing to have.
Oh, that's an amazing story. I'm glad you shared that with the audience. And,
Yeah.
I've got a signed picture behind me of President Bush 41 and Barbara Bush
Mhm. Can see it behind you.
thanking me for protecting them.
Right.
They were just very kind and nice people.
Hmm.
And I knew that former President Bush, just based on his, let's face it, he's a war hero, fighter pilot, shot down, amazing career.
Right.
And I knew that, he treasured his time at the CIA.
Hmm.
And I knew he cared about a guy like Bill Buckley, and he knew the sacrifice that Bill made, the ultimate sacrifice.
Yeah.
But I never expected to get anything back from him. My goal was simply to bring the book to his attention,
Right.
hoping that he would at least read it or enjoy it in some capacity. Or
Hmm.
um, so, but to your point, I think what people fail to recognize is the even though people like President Bush and others, President Biden and so forth, they're busy people, but I
Hmm.
think they recognize that the role they play in history
Yeah.
and the importance of just those little gestures that are extraordinarily important to people like you and me.
Right.
That, taking the time to just acknowledge that you've
Hmm.
mailed them something, and you've given up your treasure, your time and resources
Hmm.
to send them your books and coins. Extraordinarily thoughtful gesture. And I'm not surprised at the reaction of, former President Bush 43 either.
No, not at all. So yeah, it's fascinating to study them because you see one thing in the media, you see, and of course we're in a political year now, so this is like one of the worst, not one of the worst years in that regard, but a political year is just extremely daunting because both sides are fighting for people's attention, and they're, whoever the other side is just the worst person in the world. And it's like, well, there's another side to that. These people, for whatever their reason for why they're running, is these are human beings. And I think like the Trump thing, if that's showing anyone, whether you're pro-Trump, anti-Trump, whatever your stage is, it's a human being that's putting themselves out there to lead the country. For what their reasoning and all that, you can put that aside. They still have a right to live. And
Right.
whether it's a station chief that's in Beirut, or whether it's a ambassador that is in Benghazi or whatever. It's like it's easy sometimes to get lost in the story and realize that, like you had mentioned, you had to go to family members, and at first they kind of were standoffish, I'm sure, which I'm sure they're trying to protect, Bill's
Sure.
memory. And who is this guy that's coming and writing a book about him, and is he going to treat him the right way? So you can understand that, but I think the fact that they were willing to share about that, and then they're willing to give you information, and you can put a story that actually has context of who this person is, and that's what connects with people. If you tell a plain vanilla story with just factoids in it, people are going to fall asleep. So how do you connect with a reader? Well, you have to give them something that excites them, that angers them, that brings some kind of emotions out of them, because we're emotional people. So, when I'm sure when you give, your talks and your speeches, you're wanting to draw people in. You're not getting up there to, of course, bore them. You're trying to inform them, but you're informing them in a way that they're going to catch their attention, and then they're going to remember something about what you said. And if that knowledge is power, is what you're giving them, really.
Well, I think, like in Bill's case, in order to understand the man, like what drives a guy like
Hmm.
him to consistently run towards danger,
Right.
meaning at 18 volunteers to go to Korea, comes back, works his tail off, to get his college degree, then becomes one of Kennedy's first Green Berets, and then
Hmm.
goes over to Vietnam and in special forces and becomes a clandestine officer with the CIA during that time period too. And,
Yeah.
you know, comes back out of back from Vietnam and becomes an agency kind of troubleshooter and smoke jumper where wherever the world is on fire, Bill is send me, I'll go.
Hmm.
And it was so telling to listen to the old CIA hands talk about, after the embassy was blown up in 83 in Beirut, and the CIA had this devastating loss, losing Robert Ames,
Hmm.
who was running, Ali Hassan Salameh, a Black September, and the agency's trying to make sense of this new threat that they can't get their handles around, this terrorism phenomena that's taking off like wildfire. And all of a sudden, they're all blown up in this car bomb. And Bill volunteers to go to Beirut. So I was just always struck by that kind of person that,
Hmm.
and our world is filled with them. Our military is filled with these
Yeah.
people today. The 18-year-old that volunteers to go to the Marine Corps, the Army, or, to serve. And Bill's just an example of, the best that America has always
Yep.
and always given. And so he was just different. He was driven differently. I
Hmm.
think he saw evil. He thought he could make a difference. And, in many ways, he was very good at what he did until Hezbollah, grabs him and holds him hostage,
Hmm.
So I think we let Bill down. Our nation let Bill down, although we tried to move heaven and earth as best we possibly can
Hmm.
or could to get to him in time. We were just not able to get to him fast enough. I'm confident, Eric, that if we had located a specific building that he might have been held, that President Reagan would have greenlit a Delta raid or JSOC SEAL Team 6. It would have probably been JSOC at the time to try to go in and rescue Bill, but we could never ever get that kind of granular data
Yeah.
as to where he was being held, or for that matter, any of the other hostages.
Right. Well, it makes me, and as you're saying that, it kind of almost, fast forward several, many years, but how long it took for Osama bin Laden. And, by that point, and after 9/11, technology is really starting to catch up where,
Right.
satellites and all the stuff, but we still have a part of the world though where you can have all the technology in the world, but if someone is hunkered down in a nondescript place and they don't show their face, if they keep their circle tight and you don't have people whispering that there's a real tall guy staying in this house over here, how are you ever going to find them? And, it took over a decade, right, to get bin Laden.
Right.
I don't remember what year I know it was under President Obama. I don't remember now, top of my head, what year that was, but it took a long time and a lot of, I mean, the resources that were taken to track down this person, and and how they found him was, he wasn't out walking around with a sign. He kept quiet, he kept hunkered down, but eventually the hard work paid off.
Yeah, and we suffered the same kind of problem, in Washington with, I mean, it took the FBI 18 years, if memory serves me right, to find the Unabomber
Yeah.
who was mailing packages, just torturing,
Yep.
you know, college professors and government agencies and so forth. So, if you don't want to be found, it's difficult to do. And I think, it was a lot easier to get away with murder and mass murder in the 60s, 70s, and 80s,
Hmm.
and even in the 90s than it is today.
Yeah.
You know, our whole counterterrorism effort in our post 9/11 environment, is built to find people like bin Laden or the Unabomber or so forth,
Hmm.
which, I've been doing a lot of media with the second Trump assassination attempt.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I find still very odd is that, the FBI still hasn't found the January 6th bomber, the individual that left the IEDs outside the RNC and
Right.
DNC, taking politics aside of it, you know, the whole concept of the Joint Terrorism Task Forces and our counterterrorism effort are to find people just like that.
Right.
So when you look out over the threat horizon with the upcoming election, I know if I was back in Washington at the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force there, I would be no doubt that that's the number one priority
Hmm.
to try to find and locate that individual. And,
Yeah.
that's a very interesting case. And I think eventually he will be caught. And I do believe it's a male bomber. But,
Interesting. What makes you say that?
well, just from watching the videotape, the mannerisms,
Okay.
how the individual walked,
Just their gait and stuff.
just
Okay.
their gait and so forth.
Interesting.
I wouldn't be surprised if he had help
Hmm.
in some capacity from either a girlfriend or a wife or a significant other or something.
Hmm.
But, bombers leave a lot of signatures. I've done enough bombing investigations in my career to know that the amount of forensic evidence left behind by a bomb maker is tremendous. I
Hmm.
mean, hair and fiber, the way they crimp wires,
Right.
the way they tie, um, and usually they have tie wire. They usually have firing train problems. So you can see how they've turned it and retwisted it and so forth. So
Mm.
there's a
Interesting.
tremendous amount of forensics that were left behind, which should
Hmm.
produce DNA, which should produce fingerprints in some capacity. And yet the individual is still on the run.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned the Trump one, and I just had seen something earlier today. Obviously, it's we're talking, and it's what was 2 days ago, was very very recent. But the someone outside the course took a photo of the person running and the vehicle, alerted the authorities, and they used the license plate scanners that are on the freeways and stuff in Florida to actually track down that vehicle. Um,
Right.
which is quite fast. And again, it's almost not to say it was dumb luck, but you had someone outside, apparently, again, the details can be wrong, and a couple days later you get a correction. But at least what's been released right now, it was basically a civilian, or it was someone outside of law enforcement that actually had given that key piece of intel to find this person.
Yeah, and that shows you, the power of see something, say something,
Right.
and clearly drawing in the resources of Americans that witness these kinds of events, and then
Hmm.
it shows you the technology advances. I'm sure that kind of technology actually drove the Unabomber mad, right?
Hmm.
But you look at the power of things such as license plate readers that we never had that capability on my watch for many, many years.
Right.
And just the fact that you can get cell phone signatures and so forth in almost real time today is also fascinating. So, you know, they can put you exactly where you are from your home and me in
Hmm.
my house today by just looking at your phone.
Yes.
And so, those were some of the challenges that we always had back not that long ago
Hmm.
to try to piece things together. And so you can look at some of these old cold cases, whether it be, the infamous DB Cooper case, who
Hmm.
hijacked the aircraft and bailed out with the
Bailed out.
cash
Yeah.
years ago, to you literally could get away with murder. I mean,
Right.
I'll give you an example of that. I think it was in 76. We had a brilliant State Department Foreign Service officer, Yale graduate, uh, had been in Army intelligence, spoke fluent several languages, about five. Married his high school sweetheart, was from Pasadena High School,
Mm.
quarterback on the football team, goes to Yale, comes out, joins the Foreign Service, and he ends up coming home one day and bludgeoning his wife to death, his mother, and his kids sleeping.
Wow.
He takes the bodies, he puts them in the back of his Chevrolet station wagon, drives them to North Carolina, Eric, where he buries them in a makeshift grave,
Hmm.
sets the grave on fire. A park
Oh.
ranger sees this fire, thinks it's a wildfire, comes and finds these bodies. Meanwhile, the State Department officer takes the car to the Great Smoky Mountains in Tennessee and vanishes without a trace. And he ends up being the oldest man ever to be put on the FBI top 10 fugitive list.
Hmm.
And the Bureau basically has taken him off the list because they were unable to locate him.
Wow.
And we had a case opened up on him, and we had sightings of him
Yeah.
mostly in Europe, occasionally in Africa and so forth. But the guy vanishes without a trace, and he's a mass murderer.
Hmm.
And that's just the era of that time. A guy like that today could never get away with that, right?
Right.
There's too much technology, too much surveillance on the
Yes.
street. In those days, you could get on an airplane by just paying cash and getting a ticket,
Hmm.
and you could buy a passport. You could go to a foreign country, claim another identity. And it's one of those big mysteries like DB Cooper, which,
Right.
still kind of haunts me. Um, the original cold case detective from that case, the local police detective in
Hmm.
my old police department in Montgomery County, Maryland, he and I still chat about that all the time. Like, what did we miss?
Hmm.
And I've got file after file in my in storage now of that case,
Hmm.
because I still think it's one of those things that, one thing I've learned of doing cold case investigations is usually the answers are always in the files.
Hmm.
You just don't realize where it is or what's
You
that
haven't connected the dots or
you
whatever.
haven't connected
Yeah.
the dot, or you haven't found the pertinent dot.
Right. Um, any ever a chance that you could ever do a book about that particular case? Is that anywhere
Well,
in the wheelhouse? Have you thought about it?
yeah, I have.
Okay.
The only challenge with that case, it's almost like a lot of cases where there is no resolution, right?
Right. Right.
So, it's the kind of story
It'd be a
that,
cliffhanger story, that's for sure. Because
right, but there is no outcome. There's
gotcha.
no, he didn't become an Italian citizen and marry another family and
Right.
you know, lives in some ski chalet. If he's still alive, he would be, I think, 88 or 89 today if he's still alive.
Okay.
And um, but the brutality of how he did this to me is just shocking. He killed his mother first.
Hmm.
The other fascinating aspect, and I had the original Mindhunter, John Douglas, on my podcast a few years back.
Okay.
and he actually worked the case and did some modeling on this. And
Mm,
so we were able to shoot the bull about this old case.
hmm.
Is, he kills his mother first, even though he's got a gun and a shotgun. He uses, an object to kill his entire family, to include his kids. But he takes Leo, the dog, the golden retriever,
Hmm.
and brings Leo with him to North Carolina. So, you can't make sense of these kinds of cases at times. Do
Yeah.
I think it would make a good book? Yes. However, there is no resolution as to what happened to him at the end.
Right.
So, you know how publishers are, right? You know how editors are. Well, what happened to him?
Right.
Well, I have some suspicions, but I can't tell you exactly what happened to him. And
Right. Yeah. You
we may
can't get
never
all that.
know.
You can't get to that point and then say, well, the last chapter is fiction.
Right,
We're gonna tell
right,
you what I
right,
think might have happened or what I envisioned what might have happened with him. So,
right. Exactly, exactly. But there's not a month that goes by that I'm still not thinking about that case and
yeah.
talking to the old cold case detective. We're like two old geezers, looking at these old files from the 1970s. And I
Right.
guarantee you that we're the only two people in the world looking at those files at that moment in time, because I just don't think anybody, it's been too long
Been
ago.
too long. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah, I know a few people that have worked cold cases, and like have retired from detective jobs and then gone back. I know one person in particular, I can't mention who they are, but they've gone back and worked with the force and and that's all they've done is try to look at cold cases, because they had just decades of experience. And, and so that's what they, kind of almost their retirement would be. Man, if I can just get closure, closure for families, of course, closure for people that knew the victims of some of these crimes that occur. And but yeah, for some of these cases now, we're getting so many years past that even those family lines are, getting where it wasn't dad anymore, it was grandpa or grandma or whatever. So,
Right. Right. And I was doing a talk not too long ago, Eric, and I was discussing, for example, I use Carlos the Jackal as an
mhm.
example. And I could see this puzzled look in the audience. And it was a bunch of students at a university that
Okay,
were studying terrorism. And finally, one student raised their hand and said, Mr. Burton, who was Carlos the
who was
Jackal?
this? Yeah,
And I have to kind of reset my error in time frame to realize that nobody really recalls or understands or knows that error anymore.
right.
So I usually have to walk people through a little bit of history
Take
to
them.
to get
Yeah.
take it, bring them back into why this is important today.
Right. Well, and I think to have your experience and your knowledge and being able to bring those pertinent historical facts to people, especially if they're looking at that as a career, that's pretty important, pretty critical, especially from a history perspective. Certain jobs nowadays, history might not play into it, but if you're doing anything along that lines, even though the technology of how you investigate things or the technology of how to catch people has changed, there's a lot of fundamentals that I'm sure, I don't know it personally, but just from what I've read and stories I've written from books like yourself, of there's a lot of fundamentals that will carry on irregardless of what the technologies are currently and will be. Because the other thing that's true is anything that we think we hold in our hand and we go, wow, we have technology in our hand, we don't got the newest stuff.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think there's a little bit of the resources and the technology, the technology evolution in this business today has just been amazing to me,
Yeah.
as well as some of the countermeasures that you can put into play. I mean, companies that can take down, for example, scrub your internet footprint,
Hmm.
for example, to kind of make you a harder target for internet trolls or terrorists that might be looking for you or stalkers. I
Right.
mean, the amount of technology today to be used either to help safeguard privacy is simply amazing.
Hmm.
I know that more and more people should take advantage of those kinds of systems, but
Hmm.
really don't. having said that, you look at it from a investigative perspective, and the amount of technology that's in the hands of law enforcement today, as we discussed with the second, attempt to shoot President Trump
Hmm.
and in West Palm, is just, phenomenal when you start connecting the dots. And
Yeah.
your national level assets today are just phenomenal. I mean, look, the US owns the cyberspace in many ways and
Hmm.
owns the airwaves and so forth. So, your digital footprints today can be used very interestingly in
Hmm.
my perspective. And as someone that writes great fiction like you do with The Body Man and Breach of Trust and the Brad Thors and the Jack Carrs of the world, that weave, some of these innovative technology
Hmm.
over the horizon kind of systems or current systems, is just fascinating to me. And I think that's what keeps readers engaged. I mean, I love reading thrillers.
Hmm. It's
And
it's hard to keep them. I will say it's hard to keep them not relevant, but it's hard to keep on top of everything that's happening because by the time you get something done and you're getting ready to start the next project and you have to promote that project you wrote before, there's elements in that, especially if you're heavy in the technology side that aren't really as relevant as they were 18 months ago when you might have started writing that book.
that's a
So,
very good point. And I think
yeah.
that's probably, I don't know, but this is probably one of the biggest challenges for people like yourself, thriller writers, to have enough in there to be able to kind of look out over the horizon
Yeah.
as to what's coming. I mean, heck, GPS was kind of a classified system when I started as an agent.
Hmm.
And, look at the technology advancements along those lines. And then you look at an organization like DARPA and some of the stuff that they've invented over the years, whether it be
Yeah.
the M16 or the stealth or cloaking systems,
Right.
things like that, are just amazing to me when you start looking at, what over the horizon can bring to those of us dinosaurs now, which is what I am in the
No.
protection and intelligence space, and what's coming. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, though, Eric, the thing that's fascinating to me, you can look at the recent attempts on President Trump, and you still get back to the same kind of John Wilkes Booth kind of problem or Lee
Hmm.
Harvey Oswald, a single person with a gun,
Yeah.
to include women, if you count Sarah Jane Moore and Squeaky from
Hmm.
1975.
Right.
But 98% have been men or something like that statistically.
Yeah.
So, it boils down to basics a lot,
Right.
much like putting together a book. You got to have a good outline.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's tell you what, it's just wild. Like we were talking about when we started, it's wild times, but it's also amazing times. The fact that I can be talking to you in this technology, it's something that, we both remember when there wasn't anything like this. You can
Right.
you can talk to someone and we're in the same country. Can do the same thing. I was over in the UK about 18 months or so back, and I still got to see my kids. I was gone for like 10, 10 days, and I still saw my kids every day because this lovely thing called FaceTime that happens to work even across the world, basically, across the pond. So in many ways, it's a blessing. I think the curse side of it or the negative side of it is often fed by how much we allow, and this is me preaching to myself, trust me, how much we allow it to consume our time and our interests. And I'm trying to slowly wean myself off the fact of yes, social media has to be done from a marketing standpoint, from a connecting with people standpoint, but the more time I can put that down and the more time I can focus on other things that are important, I think it's better for your mental health, really.
I agree with you.
Yeah. So I want to be respectful of your time. We're getting close to an hour. So besides your speaking engagements, which I'd love for you to mention some of the things you're doing, where's Fred Burton, the writer, going next? What projects or what project currently are you working on? If you,
Well, this is top secret, but
just you and I here, we're good.
there's a book that is written and
Okay.
it's in my agent's hands.
Nice.
and he's now pushed that out as we speak
Okay.
to publishers to try to
Yeah.
see if there's any interest
You're
surrounding
out on
that.
sub is what they call it. You're out on sub. There we go.
Okay, I did not know that term, but
Submission. You're out in a submission for publishers. They call it out on
okay,
sub. So
great. We'll have to wait and see. And we've got some exciting news, behind my previous published books, but I don't think I'm at liberty to discuss that. So we'll
that's okay.
have to do another interview
Yeah. Well,
and talk further about that.
yeah, I'd love to. No, again, and you're not an old dinosaur, Fred. You're a wealth of knowledge who's sharing it in book form now, and you're speaking with people on a regular basis. You're on podcasts, so that's the other thing that's I think 40, 50, 60 years ago, older people, they in
What are
some
you
way.
saying? I'm old, Eric?
No, you didn't let me finish. 40, 50, 60 years ago, older people. So people that were, older. We're just using a broad term here. They acted like they were older, though, I think, to some degree. And I think now one of the things that you're seeing, especially as people do, gracefully age, is they've embraced technology and they've kind of, taken on these things like podcasts and all that and stay more active. That's the other thing too, is I think the generations now, my generation, as I'm getting older, because I'm getting older as well, is staying active is that key. And so much of that physically staying active then connects to mentally being able to stay active. And I think that's really important for people to kind of keep in mind as they get older of engage yourself. That's why as much as you can turn off the television. I'll watch Manning cast tonight. It's a Monday night, so I'll probably watch a little football tonight, of course. But I'll do that in moderation and I'll still spend time reading because I have another podcast tomorrow and I have a book I'm editing. So I've got some work to do before I lay my head down and get some sleep before I start before Groundhog Day kicks in again in the morning. So
I understand completely, and I think that's very sound advice.
thank you. I always end this with the same question, or almost always end the same question. So it's a little bit deep, or at least some people can see it as deep, but I think you'd agree with me that life is like a book. Got a first page, you have a last page. We don't know how many pages are in between that, which I think is actually a blessing. But as a writer and someone that has put out a wealth of books at this point, what would you want that last page for Fred Burton to say? You get to write your own last page. What's that say?
Wow, that's a great question, and I must say that I've never been asked that question.
No wrong
I
answer either. So don't forget, there's no wrong answer in that question.
I think you have to follow your own path. I think it's always best to try to make a difference in the world.
Hmm.
I think that you should not strive to make money. Uh, I know it's difficult to say in this day and age, but
Yeah.
I think you need to be engaged in work that makes you happy.
Hmm.
And I think if I look back on, uh, my life, there's a lot of things I would have done differently. But I think if you look out over the horizon, the future is very bright, not only for our nation, but for our generation as, um, to counter some of the negativity that you see every day in the
Hmm.
endless news cycle.
Right.
Um, and I would like to see more good people try to get into politics to try to affect change in our country. But um, to me, that's one of the more noble kind of professions
Hmm.
that someone could try to get themselves into. Uh, whether or not that's the kind of last page that you were looking for, that would probably be the last page I would have, or any advice I would pass on to individuals looking for my assessment or my judgment or opinion as to how someone should look at the world or their life.
I love it. There again, there's no wrong answer because the beauty of life is we're individuals with minds that we've been given that we can express ourselves the way we want. We can still currently in this country we can say what we want, although sometimes you got to be a little careful. You might get yourself in a little trouble, but we can then share that knowledge, which is what you're doing. So, last thing is for anyone that's listening, if they want to find out more about you, where should they go?
Well, thank you, Eric. Certainly you could look on social media. I'm on Instagram and X/Twitter. My website is officialfredburton.com, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on, Fred. I appreciate it.